than just a representative. That he comes with this concept of sonship, and it's interesting. I put Romans 1:4 here. It says he was declared to be the Son of God in power according to the Spirit of holiness by his resurrection from the dead. So he was already the Son before he was resurrected, but he was declared to be so with power by his resurrection. There was this is when it was time for him to be glorified. If you remember, he said, "Glorify me, Father, now with the glory I had with you from the beginning. I've glorified you here on earth because I did what you told me to do, having accomplished the works you gave me to do." So he was already the Son, but the resurrection then made him, as it says in Colossians, the firstborn from the dead. And so he went to be at the right hand of God, and he's going to say that here. He sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. He has that authority that Tom, you referenced. And so very significant. He's the heir of all things. And now who do we look to? We look to Jesus as our Savior, and because he has that authority.
I want to stick a pin in here for a second.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that the Son is a role that God, Yahweh, appointed to Jesus. Just like being Christ was that, and just like being the heir was something he appointed. I don't think that Jesus was the Son until God the Father pronounced, "Hey, we have this Father-Son thing going on here." Although, it didn't change his nature. I'm saying it changed his role, his positions, his duties. And I think we'll have many opportunities to talk about that as we go through Hebrews.
Yeah, very good, and I agree with you. I agree with you on that. He, in the beginning, he's also represented in different fashions. It's not like God had a child, but
right.
He came into the world, and he was the Son of God. He was the Son of Man, and there was sort of a special declaration upon his resurrection. So I think that's a good thing to point out. So, through whom he created the world. Again, we can think back to John chapter 1. We can think back to how God spoke everything into existence by his word, and he created the world. What does it mean that he's the radiance of the glory of God? And again, what do you picture? What does this image bring to mind to you, that he's the radiance of his glory? Any thoughts on that?
I think of the Shekinah, the glory of God, that was sort of a thing that our nervous system could not ignore. The thing that transmitted the glory of God to people in such a way that they fell down or threw themselves on the ground or ran away, or whatever their response was going to be. It was like totally overwhelming.
Yeah, no, very good. That's so that, again, a physical manifestation of God's majesty and glory that gave this impression of awe and wonder and magnificence. I think that's a good comparison, Tom.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. And they talk about, in the Old Testament, you never could actually look at God. He was too, and so you turn away and you kind of just get blasted by this shine. And so that was all you could handle, like you didn't go more direct than that. But Jesus, he could stand right in front of you. You could just look right at him. So you're seeing God, and he's right there. He's right in front of you. You get to look at him. And so he's kind of that eminence from God that you're able to look at, that is you can handle it.
Can I throw in a little physics, just gratuitously?
Physics. All
Yes.
right.
So
Dial up your IQ a little bit. Dale's
God is not made out of stuff.
right.
Matter is stuff. Energy is stuff. everything we can measure, stuff. God is spirit. So he translates himself into stuff, or projects or imprints himself into stuff to give us an idea. Like he can manifest himself as the, the scriptures, or the words of the prophets, or the most exact representation of Jesus. So,
Mhm.
and I think the radiance of God's glory is exactly what you're saying. We can't we can't we can't survive. We might not even be able to understand it if that spirit glory was to break through into the world of stuff. I could see it just destroying anything it came in contact with. But this is translated. It's not like it's dialed down, although it is to go across. It has to be translated into stuff for us to get it.
Yeah. We think about, and you guys have all kind of alluded to this, we think about God's glory as it appeared on the mountain before the children of Israel. And remember the children of Israel? They're like, okay, don't do that again. And Moses, you go talk to God, and we don't want to ever experience that again. It was too terrifying. It was too much for us. And then when Moses would go see God, you remember he came down and what had happened to his face? It was right, and he'd have to veil his face and that sort of thing. So this idea of a radiance was back then, and then we think about John in Revelation when he actually sees the risen Christ, he falls at his feet, and so the glory of God, as it's manifested itself in various forms, is extremely intimidating. Tom, I thought it was interesting what you said. I put John chapter 1 verse 14 in the margin here. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen His glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. What's interesting is not everybody saw that glory. Meaning they saw it, but not everybody experienced it. Not everybody
None of it got it.
appreciated or got it. Yeah. But for those like John who did, they're like, we saw the glory of God. We saw His glory as the only begotten of the Father. So he came and was this radiance, this outpouring, this showing of God's glory. And the interesting thing with Jesus was almost if you were willing to see it, you would see it in its fullness, and you'd fall at His feet and worship Him. The exact imprint of His nature, again, that we talked about that a little bit, how He came and showed Himself to be God. When you guys think about this phrase, what comes to mind? I mean, anything, if you were explaining this, if somebody said, hey, what do you mean the exact imprint of His nature? What does that mean? I mean,
Well, I think,
to what extent? Okay, go ahead, Tom.
well, I think, and I mentioned this before, I think of like a signet ring or something where he has used uh, Jesus's earthly incarnation, his incarnation as a man, to put this imprint on him. So, it you're seeing God when you see Jesus, when you see His nature, His words, His actions, His everything about Him. You're seeing God, even though God is spirit, as Dale said, and Jesus is a man. He's this made of flesh, like the rest of it. He's got that. He's got that imprint on him.
Yeah.
He's got that. He's been molded around the ring of God, so that he has this other nature, this other quality.
Hey, it's interesting, and this is, I'm sure you're alluding to this, or at least subconsciously. Jesus said that, right? Either Philip or Thomas, I don't remember which one, I think it was Thomas, said, just show us the Father, and it'll be enough. Remember that?
Yeah.
You remember Jesus' answer? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, again, even his closest disciples had to say, that had to sink in with them, that here was a man who had not transgressed, who had said and done some things that, were mind blowing. And he said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So the exact imprint of his nature, to the extent that it could be expressed in human form, it was expressed by Jesus. And this other phrase, he upholds the universe by the word of his power. Now there's another phrase in Colossians that says, that I put here, he was before all things, and in him all things hold together. So it reaches back to his work in creation, and all things hold together by him. To me, that's a phrase that's hard to totally understand. But if, again, same thing, somebody says, what do you mean he upholds the universe by the word of his power? How would you explain that? Yeah, Chris. Now, Chris knows physics, by the way, Dale. So I only insulted him when I said we had to turn our. He's like, party up, bro. So Chris.
Yeah, and this kind of goes back to. It does go to physics a little bit, and I think about. It's funny. I was thinking about this today. I was out looking at flowers and stuff, and I think there is a passage that says that God's attributes, even though they're invisible, are shown to the things that are made.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think there's little lessons here and there in nature, and but in particular right here, I give him credit, and I include Christ in this, and the Spirit. Down to, particle physics, the things that hold things together.
Yeah.
All he's got to do, and I really mean this, all he's got to do is say the word, and everything just comes apart.
Yeah.
Down to
right?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I feel like I cut you off, but do you get that's what you had to say?
Yeah, pretty much. It's when it's like everything is holding together. Even the laws of physics there's order to that, right? There's a beauty, there's an elegance to it.
There is.
And and he made that.
Yeah. And I like what you're saying, because it is true that at some point, it's not going to be physics, it's going to be God. That this universe, this world, it's going to be changed, and that's going to be by His word as well. So it's being upheld in the meantime. So Tom.
Yeah, I think in the popular culture, in the mainstream culture, there's this idea that everything is just stuff bumping into other stuff, and everything is just stuff stacked on other stuff, and so that everything can just be explained by physics and biology or whatever. But I just don't think that's the way things are at all. I think things are just much more complex and subtle and intricate and integrated with each other, so that I think he really is holding the world together. I think he's holding life together. I think he's holding the universe, every aspect of everything. It's not just a bunch of stuff that is in a pile and sort of sorted itself out. It's there's a power that's above, before physics and before biology, that gives everything its meaning and its purpose and its direction, and that power is what's being talked about here.
Yeah, no, that's really well said, and I also think that's true. We give God credit for creating everything, but we sometimes don't give him credit for holding it all together. And to me, if there was something miraculous in creation, and look, we don't know 2% about all of these physical laws. Every time we make a new discovery, we have to reshuffle the deck. There's something miraculous holding it together as well. Even as good as our knowledge is, and as well built as this universe is, I think there's something miraculous holding it together, and that's that power. Paul, it's good to have you with us. Thanks for joining. What do you have?
I'm sorry to so late. Yes, I think about we read about John chapter 1 verse 3. Through him all things were made, without him nothing was made that has been made. Because of, I guess, Hebrews chapter 1 emphasized Jesus is the God. Because of, I guess it is no problem for us to read about the Genesis chapter 1 and 1. In the beginning, Jesus created all things, I guess. Not only before incarnation, but also he lives in physics, but also he is God, God's Son. Because of Hebrew, I guess Hebrew writer compared of the then angel and then the priest and then Sabbath. Jesus was creator, all things, all universe,
Right.
who received us in our heart. He created all things. Yes, I guess.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great comment. Thank you. Yeah, and so the other thing, and I think about this, and here's where I'm getting way out of my depth, but I did work at Stanford Linear Accelerator for a few years, not in the actual physics
Yes.
side of things, but
Cool.
there was I spent an airplane ride next to the guy who was kind of heading the cosmological particle physics department, and he was talking about how they're trying to develop ways to detect dark energy and dark matter.
Mm-hmm.
These are concepts that exist mathematically, which they know that there's no way the universe could be actually doing the things it's doing unless there was dark energy and dark matter. The problem is neither of those things can be detected by our five senses. So if it's something you can't see, taste, feel, hear, or smell, how do you detect it? And he said a particle of dark matter can pass through the sun and not disturb a single atom. So the point is that there's so much to be discovered, and there's things that we know must exist, but we can't actually detect them. To me, that not to make God the God of the gaps here, but certainly there's something going on that is beyond what can be detected by our mere human capabilities that's holding this universe together. I think that's a part of what he's talking about here. So after making this end of verse 3, after making purifications for sins, he almost passes that over. He sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high. This idea that when he did that, he sat down. Like this is him being finished. And we know that he's not revealing, we have the revelation from the Holy Spirit. We have the work that he's done, and he's now sitting, reigning after he's made this purification. I've never actually ever had a typo before. This will be the first time. Full. You guys didn't notice that, but I fixed it. Jonathan Edwards. I just love the phraseology here. Jesus is an admirable conjunction of diverse excellencies. I heard that Jonathan Edwards was not a dynamic speaker, but he was extremely articulate, and I thought this was an interesting way of phrasing it. An admirable conjunction of diverse excellencies. What do you say, Dan?
I gotta go, Jim. I've got to open up another
Dale.
room. So
Yeah, always good
thanks.
to come back. All right.
Great study, man. This is gonna be a blast.
All right. Thanks, Dale. See you next week, hopefully. All right. So now you're listening going, hey, it's 7:55 and we're only on verse 4. We can dig into all of this. I'd like to read it. And if we don't get into much about it tonight, we'll pick up here next week. He says this now after listing all of this about Jesus, is having become as much superior to angels as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs. So basically, he's the Son. Naturally, he's not simply a messenger, as exalted as angels are. And in their mind, he's going to go on to say that the old law was delivered by angels. Angels were heavenly beings, were exalted, but the Son is just so much better. So he says, and you hear a bunch of quotes, "For to which of the angels did God ever say, 'You are my Son, today I've begotten you'?" Psalm 2. Or again, "I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son." Verse 6. And again, when he brings the firstborn into the world, he says, "Let all God's angels worship him." Verse 7, of the angels, he says, he makes his angels winds and his ministers a flame of fire. But of the Son, he says, "Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of a brightness is the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions. And you, Lord, laid the foundation of the earth in the beginning, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will all wear out like a garment, like a robe. You will roll them up. Like a garment, they will be changed, but you are the same, and your years will have no end. And to which of the angels has he ever said, 'Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet'?" Verse 14, are they not all ministering spirits sent out to serve for the sake of those who are to inherit salvation? This is a whole section. It's making a single point, and that is, as much as you might admire angels, as much as you might think that in the sort of order of things, God is first and angels are second, the Son is far superior. And here we're going to go to these Old Testament verses, and I'm going to establish that for you. Now, I'll just talk a little bit, and what we'll do is we probably won't get to it tonight. I want to talk a little bit about angels, especially verse 14. But I want you to see what he's doing here. Psalm 2 is a reference to a very messianic psalm where he talks about bringing his Son into the world and how the nations mocked the idea that his son, the heir, would be king. But it says God laughs at the nations, and he says, "You're my son, today I've begotten you." What's interesting is the 2 Samuel verse, which kind of stands out, where he says, "I'll be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son." That is when God was speaking to David about Solomon. And a lot of these other references, especially the ones that are in the Psalms, reference David. As he's doing this, these Hebrew Christians are aware that every single promise or every single word about David or his successors was ultimately messianic, and they knew it. The Hebrew writer here seems to not spend any time having to explain, hey, these are all messianic passages, if you didn't know it already. They already knew it. So when the Lord says to David about Solomon, and again this is in verse 5, "I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son," that applied to every one of the Davidic heirs. And ultimately, and most majestically, to the final heir, Jesus, who would sit on David's throne in its fullest sense. And so we read these and we think, are these all really talking about Jesus? Well, the answer is they were either talking about David or they were talking about one of David's heirs, but they all find their final fulfillment in Jesus, and that's how he can apply them to the Son. And that's what he does here. This idea of the scepter of his righteousness, "Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet." All of these things are applicable to the Davidic kingdom and then finally to Christ. And so as he just lists these off in kind of shotgun fashion for them, they would all have heard these in the synagogue saying, this is about David, this is about Solomon, this is about the Davidic throne, these are also all about the Messiah, and they all would have been nodding up and down. Does that make sense? All right, so it is 8 o'clock, so what we're going to do because we've talked a little bit about those. And if you have any questions about any of these in particular, or if any of these stand out to you, maybe that's where we'll start off class. And then we're going to talk about verse 14 a little bit about these ministering spirits and the place of angels, just to have a discussion about that before we move into chapter 2, which is a continuation of this thought. He's going somewhere with this, speaking about angels. He's going somewhere, and we want to make sure we don't miss it as we go into chapter 2. Paul, you had a comment?
Yes, I guess as we read about the Hebrews chapter 1, we must, the situation, as you know, at that time, the changing Christian from the Jews, they were very, very difficult situations. The first is Nero persecution, and the second is, as you know, Jews persecution, because of they, even they received just Christ, but they were very, very discouraging now. At that time, the Hibraic writer emphasized Jesus Christ, you had received Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, who is Jesus Christ, is never compare of angels and Moses and others, because of you who received Jesus Christ is creator, I guess. Yes.
All right, Paul, thanks for pointing that out. So, and that's we're going to get into that in more detail, but that is part of the setup for this whole letter that the Hebrew writer wrote, and that is they were going to be discouraged by the persecution from Rome and from the Jews.
Yes.
And they needed to know that they needed to not go back or lose their confidence.
Yes. Yes.
All right, thank you. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you.
So, Ellen, thank you. It's the first time we've had you here. Thanks for joining from your car. It was good to have you with us. Everybody else, and Mary Jo, you joined in the middle. It's good to have you again, Mary Jo.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, we'll get into
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
We'll get into this next week.
Yeah, next week. Yes.
All right.
Thanks a lot. See you all next week.
Yeah.